Psychoanalysis and philosophy. Man has to go back. Going back is not something new to psychoanalysis. In fact, psychoanalysis has been criticized for going back too often, almost getting absorbed and obsessed with the past, especially the early past. Our discussion today is slightly different from the classical revisit to the past, catharsis of events related to the past, reality acceptance of events related to the past, which form the central part of classical psychoanalysis. Our discussion today will be slightly different from this conventional and everyday work of psychoanalysis. Let us look at what we wish to go into. Separate from going back, which we every day do in psychoanalysis, there are some more facts, processes, events related to going back. Let us have a overview of it before we go forward. Regardless of pathology or no pathology, Jung talked about a concept, very important concept. He called it the stroke of the noon. And he gave an example, an analogy of sunrise. The sun starts moving upwards, reaches the top point, and then starts the descent. So there is an ascent, reaching the top point, and the descent. Analogous to it would be human youthfulness. We start going towards youth, reach the pinnacle, and then start going down. Similarly, when we look at the psychological makeup that we have, we can divide life into pre-35 and post-35. So Jung talks about going up till 35 and then slowly descending down. And if we draw a line at 35, to the left of it is the first innings of life, to the right of it is the second innings of life. Some people draw this line not at 35, but at 42, where they put the midlife crisis. Perhaps it starts in a proto-way at 35 and reaches its full-blooded strength at 42. What was important to Jung was that the first half, the left-hand part of that line, the values and goals of life were very different. The central concern was physical strength, physical pleasure, ambition, making money, establishing oneself, finding a mate, creating a family, building a house. But in the second half, the center shifts from outer goals more to an inner life. So the center shifts from acquisition and success in the outer world to culture, spirituality, art, science, doing something for society, more things of the inner world. If we use two words, abundance and plenitude, to signify plenty in the outside world and plenty in the inside world, The first half is about abundance in the outer world, the second half about plenitude in the inner world. There is a reversal of values, and it is fortunate in a way that nature provides us this station to halt, to look back, assimilate the learning, bring about a balance, and plan the second half more with awareness and experience than the first half. The first half largely comes from our fate, our impulses, our half knowledge, our lack of experience, and more of environment in which we live. There is not much of considered thought. There isn't much of experience which we can bring about to plan out the first half. So the first half is more or less driven by fate, driven by environment, driven by impulse, driven by ignorance and inexperience. Second half is more conscious, more wise. And therefore, the end of the first half should not be taken as a tragedy, rather as an opportunity for a more aware, more wise, and a more enlightened and a more realistic second half. What is necessary for this transition to a successful second half is going back in a very profound way, in an honest way, into the first half. Without that profound existential revisit, a holistic revisit, the second half cannot be wisely planned. Man has to go back, therefore, to the first half to wisely plan the second half. And this, from Jung's point of view, was a very important component of his individuation. Because the first half is individuation by default, but the second half is individuation by choice. To make those choices, it is necessary to go back into the first half. So man has to go back in order to wisely move forward. In a less profound way, this going back also is seen in an everyday situation. We all delight in going back to our school, to our old home where we once used to live, to old places we once used to visit. In India, when the first generation of people came from villages to the cities to work, every vacation in summer and in Diwali, twice a year, they would go back to their village for the vacation. Inevitably, they would go back. And they would come back reconnected, rejuvenated. Similarly, there is a fascination for old movies, old songs. After midlife, after 42, there is a strong rush, an inevitable push to have a school reunion or a college reunion. There is a very large market for retro products through which man goes back into his past. And there is a very important custom in many communities in India where those who are living in the cities and who have just migrated from the villages, the first generation of migration, when they get old and sick and they are about to die, most of them prefer to go back to their village and die. In a way, the last days are days of nostalgic going back, assimilation, completing the circle, and achieving the closure. So these are many ways of going back, apart from the classical going back, which we do in almost every session of psychoanalysis. So there is a healthy going back and there is a tragic going back. Some of the normal healthy going backs we discussed in the last slide. The purpose of them is to learn, to be happy, to collect psychological resources, to plan the present and the future, and to live out some time in the past as we once used to have a flavor and a relish of the past as we once had. So this is healthy, normal going back into the past. So this is where the man goes back in a healthy way. And then man can go back in a tragic way. That there is some tragedy in the past. And then the going back is more of what we do in psychoanalysis, the going back to assimilate something, to mourn something, to heal something, to achieve a closure. And the most tragic would be to live there because there's nothing to live in the present or even the future. Will Durant made a very good comment. He said, the young live in the future and the old live in the past. When is the going back why is the going back with so much of intensity in some? It's almost overwhelming. They go back, but they can't come to the present at will. They are sort of sucked into the past. That is because in the past, there is a defeat, some loss, some betrayal, which has not been processed fully. It's too difficult to process. At times, even too difficult to accept. It's completely kept out of awareness by repression. It need not be one big trauma. There might be a series of events of defeat, loss, betrayal, humiliation, which would lead to disappointment. And over a period of time, the disappointment gets into hopelessness and then a complete resignation. And when the resignation happens, the loss is final, the defeat is final. There is no hope to fight back or even expect for a change. That is where the going back becomes tragic. And in that going back, it's difficult to come out of that going back. So this is a situation where man has to go back almost against his will. And it's very difficult for him to come out of that going back. In some cases, the closure is not there, and strong emotions demand closure of some kind. And therefore, you have to go back to attend to that tragedy. In some cases, there are many events unprocessed. In some cases, and this is one of the most tragic things, some people cannot create attachments, at least not as most others can, after a point in their life. So in most of such cases, the only attachments one has is to parents, a couple of friends, and maybe one or two girlfriend or boyfriend. And except for these, one has not been able to attach to anybody And as one gets into 30s, this starts biting. This attachment vacuum starts creating trouble. And this attachment deprivation is something where, especially as one ages after 30, and most prominently after 40, new attachments can't build up, old attachments have not survived, and therefore one only has memories of the past to go back. This can easily lead to a midlife crisis, which cascades into depression. It's accentuated by midlife parental loss or loss of any significant emotional person. That often precipitates depression, doesn't go off for 2 3 years. Often we find there is a change of school, and with the change of school starts an attachment vacuum which after which never can be fulfilled, never can be filled up. Sorry. And that is because the change of school is snapping of attachments, and it's so painful, the unconscious mind decides never to attach again. And therefore, the only thing one has to go back to are memories of those past attachments, those past schools, and so on. All attachments later usually are quarter attachments, half attachments, but always hesitant, held back attachments. Change of home, like change of school, can easily happen, that the change, psychologically speaking, is never completed. The attachment to the old home, old school can be so strong that you can never get attached to the new school or the new home. Often the only way to overcome this is to physically go to the old school, the old home, and see if you are lucky that that place is no longer the same, it has changed, and the heaven which it once was is over. If the heaven still goes on, the fortune of that place or that school might be your misfortune, because then you cannot separate. You want to go back and live there. And the best way then is to periodically make visits there, twice a year, thrice a year. It will bring back the emotional liveliness and health. But if that place is changed, then there is a possibility of moving on, which is not as good a possibility as revisiting it, but still it will free you in some way. There will be mourning, but after mourning, you will be free. Man has to go back. Is this going back always pathological? Yes and no. In some cases it is, in some cases it is not. More often than not, it is not, and it's very existential. It's only when the existential becomes critically acute and starts everyday impairment, then it gets into the realm of DSM, which is more of a coincidence, a rare coincidence. But this is a deep existential and spiritual situation, not run-of-the-mill pathology. And this calls a deep journey into oneself and life, not a 12-session short-term theory, a therapy. But if lived through, it leads to a lot of creativity, productivity, and it's very natural. This man goes back is very natural. We see this even in animals. Some animals travel distances to reach back their place of birth. Some animals travel to their place of birth before they are about to die. Mammals certainly come back to places where they have memories. You can see that in cats and dogs. Whenever they are alone, there is an attachment vacuum. They regress back and they go back to places where once those attachments were. And those places are associated with the memories of attachment. And they go there and often they try to live out the old times. In cats, it's very clear how they process emotional loss, how they use transitional objects, how they try reattachment. So it's not only a human phenomenon, it's more of a natural mammalian phenomenon. Man goes back for mourning and closure, and seeking of closure is natural. It's a natural psychological and natural spiritual desire to have closure. The closure completes the circle. It's only with a circle which is not open, it's only with a circle that is complete, then we can go into rest, we can go into peace, we can close our eyes and go to sleep. What are the outcomes or implications for psychoanalysis? The first is about theory development. This going back, not only going back in therapy sessions, but going back in many ways that we discussed, has to be conceptualized and brought into practice. Physical going back has to be encouraged. Physical reconnect with the past in a very concrete way has to be encouraged. It has to be accepted as natural, spending time in going back, spending time in reconnecting, spending time in reunions. It is natural, and if it is not happening, we have to encourage it, and it has to be lived, not just talked about and felt in the therapy. It has to be lived. The therapy room cannot substitute for the real living, no matter which technique we use. It has to be encouraged and discussed, especially for those post 35 in age, and definitely for those who are into midlife. Closure has to happen, preferably by living it out. If not, it can of course happen in dreams. A weak closure can happen in the therapy room, but the best is it has to happen by living it out. And closure once achieved, circle is completed. Uh, Individual wholeness is achieved no matter how limited that wholeness is.